Fred, can you hear me okay?
Yes, Ashvin, can you hear me?
Yes, all good to go.
Good to see you. Thanks for making the time. I'm enjoying. I've been looking forward to having this conversation with you.
Same here.
Yeah.
Excited to be here.
So, Ashvin, you are the chief customer officer at Gainsight. Before we sort of get into it, maybe you could just give people sort of the 90-second kind of background on you and the company.
Yeah, happy to. So, as Fred called out, I'm the Chief Customer Officer at Gainsight. We're a software that helps basically our customers and companies manage subscriptions and recurring revenue and by making your customers successful. The general notion is in the recurring revenue world that we all live in, if your customers are successful, they will continue to not only renew those recurring contracts, but also buy more from you and grow with you. And so our software basically helps you understand who's using the product, who is not, what orchestration can you do with respect to reaching out to customers when they are using or not using, and hence make your customers that much more successful. And Fred, I've been at Gainsight now for about 6 years, live in San Francisco with a beautiful 5-year-old and another one on the way end of the year.
That's good. Congratulations. That's
Thank
terrific.
you.
So, look, for the benefit of some of our viewers, can you sort of explain customer success and customer experience and what you mean by that and how you think about that?
Yeah, totally. So I started talking about this notion of recurring revenue and why in this world, basically, your customers have a lot more choice than they used to. So imagine like the competitors of Zoom, that you can go with Teams, you've got GoToMeeting, you've got Blue Jeans, you've got like so many different options. And any customer of any of these vendors can actually switch at any point in time. It's very easy. Switching costs are super low. In addition, your customers have a lot of voice in the marketplace when it comes to review sites like TrustRadius and G2 Crowd and Gartner Quadrants. There's just so many opportunities, and even Twitter for that matter. Folks have a lot of voice. Your customers have a lot of voice. So switching costs are easy, lots of opportunities, lots of competitors, and your customers have a lot more voice, which means we are basically living in the age of the customer. And in this world, you need to make your customers super successful for them to not only buy more, like continue buying from you, but buy more and be advocates in the marketplace. And so that entire notion is what we call as customer success. We're a pretty nerdy company, Fred. So the way we've basically boiled this down to a math formula. We call it CS, or customer success, equals customer experience plus customer outcomes. The general idea is like if you think about like an Uber ride or Lyft ride in the world where we used to take ride sharing services.
Yeah.
Like going from point A to point B is the outcome that you get from the ride. Whether the driver speaks to you at 5 a.m. on your way to the airport when you don't want to be spoken to, or plays music that you like or don't like, all of that is the experience throughout that journey. You can take that same equation to our business to business relationships. Whether you're achieving like either qualitative or quantitative outcomes from your software that you buy is the outcomes. And whether you enjoy talking to the people at the customer, are you getting something in addition to the product? Thought leadership, guidance, like true partnership is all the experience. And so our general idea is you combine those two and you deliver customer success to your customers.
So I love that formula. And tell me, Ashvin, like how is that formula working now in this age, right? The world has turned upside down since March and the pandemic. Can you talk to me about sales and your business and how your approach to customer focus has changed and evolved since then?
Totally. So in general, like this whole movement has been gaining a lot of traction, but the pandemic has done basically, Fred, a couple of things. One is it's accelerated as folks can't see each other in person. They're not in office. They're working from home. In general, digital transformation for companies is definitely accelerated. So if you were thinking of a cloud product, if you were thinking of as a service product, things have just accelerated throughout this cycle. And then the second big trend that pandemic has caused is basically new business is slowed down as people are watching their purses, figuring out, at least for the first half of 2020, folks were on pause for buying any new software for that matter from any vendors, which basically meant the best cash flow engine that companies had was retaining their customers as much as possible. And so these two trends have generally played in our favor. We're kind of enjoying the counter cyclicality of the pandemic, in that retention is that much more important, customer success is that much more important, and companies are getting digitally more transformed. So we've seen the benefit of a lot of that play out in the way we've grown as a company and the sales has grown.
That's terrific.
Yep. How's that been on your side of the house?
Yeah, so I mean, at the Weather Group, right, and for the media business in general, I can speak kind of holistically, right? So, I would say in the last 7 months, all the trends that you saw beforehand have just sort of accelerated like everything else. So, like the movement away from sort of mass kind of linear experiences now to sort of customized one-to-one kind of OTT delivered services, you're seeing really pick up pace, right? So more and more people are no longer sort of subscribing to cable and satellite, which is kind of our core business where the Weather Channel is. But I would say the difference is live still matters. So people still look for those kind of live experiences even more so, right? Yep. Particularly now when people are kind of sheltering in place, so they still gravitate towards that. But if you're in the media business, and to use your formula from a customer outcomes perspective, customer experience, if you're not delivering that one-to-one relationship, giving people the content where they want it, when they want it, how they want it, you're just not going to be successful. And so you see a lot of businesses quickly scaling up. I mean, Disney just retooled. I mean, look at the reorganizations in the last 2 weeks in this business between Disney, Warner Media, NBC, even our business, smaller, but the same thing, really focused on investing and sort of delivering those kind of one-to-one kind of customer experiences and giving them access to as much content as they can where they want it. You're seeing a lot of the technology, the development of kind of fast channels, free ad supported television channels, right, that are developing very quickly, AI driven, with content barter relationships among companies. And the theory is, hey, look, just like Uber, other businesses, as the more platforms that I can access that service, the better off I'm going to be. The kind of walled garden approach that you saw in media is rapidly breaking down, and there's still that core part of the business that'll be there. But you're seeing just now how quickly in 2020 how those trends have accelerated.
Totally makes sense. I love the point around like one-to-one being almost as important as like a one-to-many. That totally resonates.
So Ashvin, what we're talking about here, right, is also talking about how small businesses can really kind of ramp up into very large kind of global businesses. And so, one business in particular, Zoom, right, before the pandemic, very unknown. So what was their strategy? And then as we think about where they are now, how do they win by a wide margin to get to where they are today?
Yeah, I mean, like, I'm sure it's awesome to be at Zoom, like both ways, like in terms of business, but also they're probably being challenged on the infrastructure piece with the exponential growth that they've seen. And I won't pretend to be an expert on Zoom and their inner workings, but I use Zoom, and as an end user, like my sense is they did a couple of things really well, in my opinion. The first one is like just getting back to basics. They weren't the first to any of the teleconference software in that sense. There were tons already existing, but I think they went back to the basics and said, let's optimize the tech and get the call quality, which is the single biggest thing that is important amongst all the bells and whistles. But like, let's just get the tech call quality to like the best possible. And I honestly think their call quality is really good. And so I think they went back to basics, which is like a really good strategy for other small businesses. And then the second one is, I think they launched with keeping it simple, while other like Teams and like other software basically had tons catered to the enterprise space. I think they were just simple to use. An end user can go in, like even families can just start talking to each other by setting it up very simply. And so keeping it simple, I think, was another piece that they've that they started with. But if you've been using Zoom for a while, you'll notice that they've added tons of new functionality, and probably a factor of them selling to larger enterprises who are now demanding things of them that they have to now include into the software, right? So it is already, I can see it start getting a lot more complex than it used to be.
Yeah, so let me ask you, so do you have any comments? I mean, we talked about what they did right, but maybe what some of the folks in this space have not done as well. You don't necessarily have to name names, but what have you seen some of the mistakes in your, in your perspective, like through this process that companies have made that could be good learning for our audience?
Yeah, I think it's maybe the flip of what I was talking about, which is like, I think sometimes it's good for established players to almost disrupt themselves, like go back and look at truly getting the voice of the customer and saying, like, how can we go back to basics? How can we potentially, and if you can't solve the behemoth that you've created in the software already, is there another version of this which is a much smaller application for maybe like smaller companies and smaller segments and smaller users? So just going back to the basics and saying, how can we keep this simple? How can we start with something small that is super scalable across the spectrum? I think is something that is relevant even for larger companies who potentially want to disrupt themselves and be competitive in the space that we're in.
Yeah.
I don't know, like Fred, any insights from you?
Yeah, I mean, so look, just for our own business, right? I think if you're not sort of taking it, particularly for where I'm in, sort of a legacy business, if you're not taking a hard look at yourself and willing to disrupt, your own business, then you're not on the right path. For us, so if you think about it, weather information is essentially utility.
Yeah.
If you're going to have a linear channel that's dedicated to that 24/7, distributed traditionally, how do you connect with consumers who are quickly migrating elsewhere? So there's a couple of things. One, you have to look at it, from your core product and using technology to tell stories better.
Yep.
It's amazing. We have immersive mixed reality kind of technology to really, connect with viewers on a more local basis, and also take them inside, whether it be these wildfires out in the West Coast or whether it be things that are happening in severe storms. I think there's a heavy emphasis on branding. I mean, I think that's important for our audience to understand. Branding is not just, I think you've touched on this, is not just it's about outcomes, but that experience also implies an emotional connection, with the consumer. And so whether you're in the B2B space or you're like us in the B2C space, you have to make a powerful connection with a consumer to really help you stand out. And that goes back to also what you cover from a content perspective, kind of who you are and making sure you're staying relevant to your audience. And I think the other thing is, I think we're kind of picking up, and this is, you've been in the tech space for a long time. You got to be willing to experiment and take some risks and fail, and be willing to fail fast and move forward. Right. And so, we're launching, content and linear engines at a very rapid pace, sometimes in the span of, 3 months, right? Just to get out in the marketplace and take advantage of the distribution. We've got a very mature, distribution team and process that allows us to get access to, audiences. And, we need to marry that now with kind of state-of-the-art digital marketing technology, which not all media companies have. You're seeing that ramp up pretty quickly because it's essential that you sort of move beyond the sort of one-to-many, right, which was the model, but also make sure that you can connect and have that kind of data. And in particular, right, advertisers are, looking for that. And so whereas traditionally you fought against the Googles and the Facebooks of the world, where you talked about scale and quality of content, and you talked about safety and the environment, and all that stuff is still true. But if you can't back that up with data, if you can't back that up with more personalized experiences, you're just, you're fighting a losing battle. And so I think you're seeing a lot of companies very quickly move, into that space. And again, the beauty about technology is it makes possible to do things that just even 3 or 4 years ago would have cost, millions of more dollars and taken a lot more time. Whereas now you just sort of pivot quickly, and you see an opportunity to get your content somewhere and distribute that. If you can back that up with a MarTech stack and the things you need and understanding from a powerful,
right,
you can resonate and you can take a shot. And I think that's what, you're seeing now, which, in an industry that was, much more cyclical, is trying to move more quickly to a different kind of time scale.
Awesome. That's super insightful. Yep.
Yeah.
Right.
So let me ask you something. How does your company, Ashvin, assess, SWOT and pest analysis? The latter, for those who don't know, being political, economic, social, and technology versus sort of the traditional, strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. How does it, analyze those in order to understand, where a brand or a customer stands vis-a-vis the competition?
Yeah, it's a good question. We do this almost on a 6 monthly basis. Like there's just so much disruption happening, even pre-COVID, but maybe accelerated by COVID. We do this as part of like every 6 month planning cycle. We've more recently even started doing it quarterly. But like the general idea would be like we've done a few different things. One is I've set up a separate function in my organization, and the title is basically like a VP of customer experience. And the general idea behind that role is to think about the entire customer journey, the customer lifecycle working with us, and seeing even outside of my customer organization, what other teams work with customers, either directly or indirectly, and where might there be like certain moments of truth where things break down. I'll give you a couple of examples. Is one, like when there is a big support ticket and like support issue going up, things have broken down, and suddenly there is an email from finance to the customer that basically talks about collections and like accounts receivable. That experience, as you can imagine, is terrible and grating for the customer, where I'm already working with you, things aren't working, and then finance sends me this notice or whatever. Like, why can't you talk to each other and collaborate? Like, those are examples of things that happen in every company, and because every team works in a silo. So the general idea behind this customer experience role is to tie all of these big moments of truth and see where we are not coordinated so that we can improve on that. I bring that up because sometimes the SWOT is done with a very functional silo. Like I can go in and say, from my standpoint, the SWOT looks like X, but then, and product might have a different point of view, sales will have a different point of view. But I think there is lots of value in bringing almost like a customer lens to this. And so as we do the SWOT every quarter and 6 months, we've got every team talking about their point of view. And then this role talks about almost like it has the seat of the customer at that forum. And so they bring in that point of view. Occasionally, like annual planning cycles, we'll actually get a couple of customers to join our conversations and give their point of view on like what's working, what's not, what opportunities are they seeing, what threats that are they seeing. And it's always fascinating. Like we have a point of view on what the SWOT looks like, but getting a customer to actually opine on it is sometimes eye-opening in that sense.
Yeah, I like the rigor that you put around that, from a quarterly, standpoint, twice a year to sort of go through that. I think that's really important. Sometimes that stuff can get lost in the day to day, right? And so people sort of look at that at a less frequently. But I think having a more rigorous process and more frequency is important.
Totally. Actually, like that same question back to you, Fred. Like, how do you, especially a company the size of the Weather Group, how do you make that entire thing happen? How do you keep the ship moving in the right direction and take a step back?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question, and I think we're so action oriented, right? But I think what we've done, and some of this predates my arrival. I've been with the company 3 months, but even some of this, what we've been focused on is they started out, and I think it was smart, doing a lot of research for the first time in many years, kind of really touched base and kind of got grounded in the customer, doing some survey, both quantitative and qualitative work. And for a brand that didn't have a lot of data, that was critical. Since I've come on board, how do we take some of those insights and do a couple of things? One, as I said, build data and technology so we can have more regular access to those kind of insights and build a process around, so we never get in a situation where it goes years again, where we're really kind of checking in with a customer, relying on, very rudimentary metrics around, Nielsen ratings and things like that to see how we're doing. But the other thing is just from having a small, nimble team is making sure that we are starting from the beginning and kind of doing this kind of thorough analysis. So a lot of, kind of traditional things, marketing briefs, and kind of, sitting back and kind of spending some time as a group, going through all stakeholders and suggesting, hey, we should do that at least on a twice annual basis as we do this. And some of that is happening more frequently as we launch into new businesses. And so I think that the interesting thing, I think for us is because if you think about it, when you're providing weather information primarily to people when folks are sheltering in place, they're not commuting, they're not traveling, all of a sudden the information that you primarily trade in is not as relevant to people. So you very quickly then have to say, okay, how do we become relevant? Almost it's like, how do you remind the fish that the water they swim in, which they don't even think about, is important to say to people, right? So, that's been in some sense as a marketer incredibly fun because it forces you to be strategic, out of the gate and say, look, we have a problem here. I think the mistake also that, people would make, and this is, I think, true for our business, I would imagine it's true for the businesses that you're working with, is I think it's a mistake to assume that whenever we get on the other side of this, that life will kind of go back to the way it was. There's going to be a new normal, whatever that is. So that impacts travel, how we work, how we build teams, how we engage with one another, how we shop, all those things. So I think that the challenge is how can you lean into the data that you have now, but then also, use the best tools at your disposal and strategic insights and doing things like this, talking to folks like yourself and going to conferences and get a sense of, hey, whenever people are not as afraid to be out and about, right? And there's a vaccine or whatever it's going to take, what is the world going to look like? And I think for marketers and business people, that's to me sort of the $1 million question, right? Because it's certainly not going to be what it was before. Interestingly, I don't know if you saw, United Airlines said they don't see travel returning to 2024.
Yeah.
That is well past where any projection is when we'll have a vaccine. So I think that just goes to show, right, that there's a lot of thinking right now among businesses about what that means. And I think that presents tremendous opportunities, particularly for those in our audience that are in the in the startup space.
I love it. That's awesome rigor. Again, like so hard to pull something like that and bring data and analytics at the center of operating for a company the size of the Weather Group. So that is awesome to hear. That's fantastic. One, maybe like I had the opportunity to read Netflix's most recent book, which is an awesome view into their culture as well. But one of the things was obviously they saw the future and they decided to disrupt Blockbuster and the entire business model from like DVD in a shop to more streaming content, etc. And obviously Blockbuster had the opportunity to buy Netflix and they passed on it. So as you think about M&A and divestiture, especially in the current climate that we live in, like how does Weather Group think about it? And any advice for how should companies think about M&A as a part of their ongoing concern?
Yeah, I think in the media, like we're privately held, right, by Allen Media and Byron Allen. So we are aggressive in that space. And I think you're right. The Netflix is a great example. I think first and foremost, similar to Netflix, you have to understand who you're trying to serve. And some people make the mistake of looking at the masses first. Whereas and this from reading the book, right? Netflix the viable market, the viable market they were going after was people who didn't want to pay late fees at Blockbuster, right? And so they sort of, chased after those and kind of grew from there. And I think businesses need to take a very cold, dispassionate view of their business models and of where they're going. And particularly, again, if you're in media or you're technology serving media, you have to be willing to move and to pivot pretty quickly. And you're seeing that now with a lot of, in some cases, people exiting businesses that they bought at too high valuation or looking at other opportunities. And I think, there has always been a heavy emphasis in my business on content development and live content, but you need to have technology and resources and people that are trained differently than those of us who grew up in the business a certain way. And I think that's really important. And again, I'll come back to Ashvin, what I said before. You have to be taking the time right now to say, what can I glean from the trends in my business to learn about what it's going to be like 12, 18, 24 months from now, similar to the guidance we just talked about from United. The same thing, if your production pipeline is delayed, if you see your advertisers or customers going someplace else, if you see consumer behavior changing in a way, we should not assume that, when all of a sudden life is going to return to normal because people won't commute like they did, they won't travel like they did. All those things are going to continue to evolve. And so I think if you're not looking at your business and trying to get out in front of that and look at maybe there's some things in your portfolio that aren't as relevant as you go forward, and we're doing that too, be willing to sort of make those decisions.
I love that. That is awesome. I know we've got about 2 or 3 minutes left. Maybe close out, Fred, with something lighter. Maybe like now that you have a lot more time with the family and at home and not traveling like you probably used to prior to the pandemic hitting, like what are one or two things that you're doing more of and enjoying?
Well, one, trying to stay out of the way. I have 4 children at various ages. Some of them are older, not here, but one is trying to stay out of the way. I think we've redefined the notion of personal space in this house.
Yes.
Right? So that's very important, I think. But I've also found just from a family perspective, what I've enjoyed is you realize how much time you invested in things that some things that you kind of put a premium on, like being in a certain market to be with people. Spend time with them. And I'm not saying that stuff isn't important, but I think you've also realized that you can build culture, you can build team, and you can do some of these things remotely. And so I think that does, for me, has been in this business for a long time, help reevaluate that. And so I think, being able to spend more time with my family, here, argue over what we're going to binge watch next, all that kind of stuff, has been fun. But I think I think it also leads it back to what we were talking about before is, how you think about, you use your time and your routines develop, and it's been a pleasure in that sense to sort of go through that process. How about you?
Similar things for the most part. Like I never thought I would say this, but I actually miss my time on United traveling cross country because like I
generally a week ago and I loved it. It's the first time since March.
Yes. Like the amount of I'm super productive on flights because it's just like unobstructed time that I just get to myself and I get so much done. So I miss some of that. But at the same time, like I'm home every day. I get to spend way more quality time with my daughter. So I've just blocked time after 5 p.m. every day to just spend time with her, pick her up from daycare or whatever, and just play ball or ride the scooter, and like small things that I had taken for granted that I'm definitely enjoying a lot more.
That's great.
And then the only other piece I'll call out is it's been like I enjoy being with people and just taking walks with them and stuff like that at work, which I definitely miss. So we are finding new ways to engage and doing like virtual happy hours a lot more and coffee breaks together and stuff. It's not the same, but we are trying to keep the engagement going virtually.
Yeah, I was going to say, I've got one of my daughters is applying to college, and I have a son who is living here, graduated, looking for a job. They definitely do not appreciate the sort of in-depth check-ins with mom and dad. So now that I'm here more, hey, I'm here, having dinner together, let's talk about it. I'm finding that they kind of scram, much more.
Love it. That is hilarious.
Yeah. No, that's good. Well, look, Ashvin, really good talking to you. I appreciate the time, and I want to thank the folks at the conference for bringing us together. And I hope, I wish you the best of luck, and thanks again for making the time.
Same here, Fred.
Yeah.
Enjoy the rest of the week.
Thank you so much, Fred, Bucher, and Ashvin, Vaidyanathan.